Welcome back to ABC General Hospital Spoilers channel. Today, we will learn about the issue that has left the entire Port Charles community in absolute shock and disbelief. The courthouse has become the epicenter of a scandal that will reshape relationships, reveal buried secrets, and expose the depths of deception that have plagued our favorite characters. Buckle up because this explosive development in the Willow trial is nothing short of extraordinary, and the ramifications are only beginning to unfold. The trial of Willow has been a tense affair from the very beginning, with the courtroom atmosphere thick with anticipation and dread. Every session has brought new twists and turns, but nothing could have prepared anyone for what was about to transpire during this fateful court appearance. The air in the courthouse was already charged with emotion as Willow's fate hung in the balance, with questions swirling about her involvement in the mysterious shooting of Drew. Spectators filled the gallery, journalists scribbled notes furiously, and the legal teams prepared for another grueling day of testimony and cross-examination. Little did anyone know that Detective Chase was about to arrive with bombshell revelations that would not only change the trajectory of this trial, but would send shockwaves through the entire community that everyone calls home. As the proceedings were underway, the courtroom doors suddenly opened with a decisive push that immediately caught everyone's attention. Detective Chase stepped into the chamber with a demeanor that was noticeably grave and serious, his facial expression betraying the weight of the information he carried. Unlike his usual casual gait, Chase moved with deliberate purpose toward the front of the courtroom, his eyes laser-focused on the proceedings. In his hands, he clutched a folder brimming with documents, and the way he held it made it abundantly clear that whatever was contained within these pages was of significant importance. The prosecutor's eyes widened with anticipation, while defense attorneys exchanged confused glances, uncertain about what surprise was about to be unveiled before the court. The judge looked down from the bench with an expression of mild surprise, but before any objections could be raised or questions posed, Chase moved forward to present his evidence. What happened next will forever be etched in the memories of everyone present in that courtroom. Detective Chase announced, with a clarity and conviction that seemed to reverberate through the entire room, that he was prepared to present evidence leading to the immediate arrest of not one, but two prominent figures in the Port Charles community. The announcement itself sent a collective gasp through the gallery. Michael Tracy and Tracy would be arrested right then, in front of the judge and the assembled crowd. The charges were serious and specific: perjury and conspiracy to cover up and conceal the truth regarding the mysterious and dangerous shooting incident involving Drew. The gravity of these allegations hung heavy in the air, and before either Michael or Tracy could even process what was being said, Chase had already begun laying out his meticulously prepared case. The evidence that Detective Chase presented was nothing short of compelling and convincing. Through a series of documents, witness statements, and investigative findings, Chase demonstrated that Michael Tracy had actually been present at the scene of Drew's shooting. More critically, Michael had witnessed the person who actually pulled the trigger. He knew who the shooter was. Yet despite this crucial knowledge, Michael had chosen to remain silent, to say nothing, to protect whoever had committed this violent act. This silence constituted perjury, as Michael had either lied under oath or failed to disclose material information to the authorities. The implications were staggering because it meant that the investigation had been compromised and justice had potentially been obstructed by someone who could have provided the breakthrough that investigators desperately needed. As the evidence against Michael piled up, Chase then turned his attention to Tracy. The charges against her were equally damning. She had actively conspired with Michael to keep this explosive secret buried. Tracy, it seemed, had not only known about Michael's knowledge of the shooter's identity, but had actively participated in helping him conceal this information from the authorities. She had been complicit in the obstruction of justice, and in doing so, she had become entangled in the web of deception that Michael had carefully constructed. The evidence suggested that Tracy had used her considerable resources and influence to help Michael maintain his silence and to shield him from the consequences of his knowledge. This revelation struck at the heart of everything Tracy prided herself on: her reputation in the community and her status as a pillar of Port Charles society. The reactions in the courtroom were immediate and visceral. Michael Corinthos, upon hearing the charges and understanding the weight of the evidence against him, appeared completely stunned and shocked. His face turned pale, and he immediately launched into vigorous denials, adamantly refuting every allegation that had been leveled against him. He protested that this was some kind of terrible misunderstanding, that the evidence was somehow being misinterpreted, that there had to be some explanation for what Chase was presenting. But even as he spoke, his lawyer was tugging at his sleeve, signaling him to remain silent and not to say anything further that could be used against him. Tracy Quartermain, meanwhile, displayed a mixture of shock and indignation. She too vehemently denied the charges, insisting that she had never conspired with anyone to cover up anything, let alone something as serious as a shooting incident. Her aristocratic bearing seemed to falter for just a moment before she straightened herself, her eyes flashing with a combination of fear and defiance as she confronted the accusations head-on. Yet despite the passionate denials from both Michael and Tracy, the evidence that Detective Chase had compiled was extraordinarily persuasive and hard to dismiss. The documentation was meticulous, the cross-references were clear, and the logical thread connecting Michael's knowledge to his silence to Tracy's involvement in facilitating that silence was impossible to ignore. The prosecutor seemed satisfied with what Chase had presented, and the judge appeared convinced that there was sufficient probable cause to proceed with formal arrests. What had begun as a day focused on Willow's trial had transformed into something far more dramatic and shocking. The moment of arrest came with shocking finality. Court officers approached both Michael and Tracy, and as the entire room watched in stunned silence, they proceeded to place handcuffs on both individuals. The metallic click of the cuffs snapping shut seemed to echo through the courtroom like a harbinger of the chaos that was about to ensue. Michael and Tracy were then escorted from the courtroom, still protesting their innocence, still maintaining their denials, even as they were being led away. The image of Michael Corinthos and Tracy Quartermain being removed from the courthouse in handcuffs was so shocking, so utterly unexpected, that many in attendance sat frozen in their seats, unable to fully process what they had just witnessed. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as the news media captured the dramatic removal of these two significant figures from the community. The headline writers were already composing their stories in their minds. Shock arrests in General Hospital Drew shooting case, or Corinthos and Quartermain arrested for cover-up. The immediate aftermath of these arrests was pandemonium. The courtroom descended into chaos as reporters tried to get statements, as family members and friends of both Michael and Tracy attempted to understand what had just happened and what it meant for their loved ones. The Corinthos and Quartermain families would need to grapple with the reality that two of their own were now facing serious criminal charges. Michael's family, his mother Carly, his siblings, his loved ones would be reeling from the shock of his arrest and the accusations against him. Similarly, the Quartermain family would be processing the implications of Tracy's involvement in what was being characterized as a conspiracy to obstruct justice. The ripple effects of this double arrest would extend far beyond the courthouse walls and into the private lives of everyone connected to these families. The fundamental question that now haunted everyone was simple but profound. Why would Michael Corinthos and Tracy Quartermain go to such extraordinary lengths to protect the identity of whoever shot Drew? What could possibly be the motivation for such a serious cover-up? This question opened up a Pandora's box of possibilities. Perhaps the shooter was someone they both cared deeply about, a family member, a close friend, someone they felt they needed to protect for reasons they considered more important than justice and honesty. Perhaps they believed the shooter had legitimate reasons for pulling the trigger, reasons that would be understood and sympathized with if revealed. Or perhaps they feared what would happen if the truth came out, feared the consequences not just for the shooter, but for themselves and their families. The mystery of the shooter's identity, which had already been the subject of intense speculation throughout the trial, now became even more urgent and pressing because two respected members of the community had apparently been willing to face serious criminal charges rather than reveal it. The new evidence that Chase had presented to the court also raised additional questions about the depth of the investigation into Drew's shooting. If Michael had witnessed the shooting, then there had to be a window of opportunity where the evidence could have been discovered earlier. How had the authorities missed this crucial detail during their initial investigation? Had Michael been particularly careful to cover his tracks, or had investigators simply not thought to scrutinize his whereabouts and activities on the day in question? And what about Tracy's involvement? How deeply had investigators initially looked into her potential connection to the incident? These procedural questions suggested that either the investigation had been less thorough than it should have been, or that Michael and Tracy had been particularly clever in their efforts to evade detection. Either way, it opened up the possibility that there were other aspects of this case that remained hidden, other secrets that had not yet been uncovered or revealed. The implications for Willow's trial were also significant and complex. The dramatic revelation of new evidence and the arrest of two individuals connected to the case would undoubtedly impact how the trial proceeded. Would the focus shift away from Willow entirely? Would the new developments concerning Michael and Tracy somehow exonerate Willow, or would they complicate her legal situation further? The defense team, if they were sharp and strategic, might use this new development as evidence of misconduct or incompetence on the part of the prosecution, potentially weakening the case against their client. Alternatively, the revelation could be a distraction, a smokescreen that actually strengthens the prosecution's case against Willow by showing that there were other people involved in covering up the details of the shooting. The true impact would only become clear as the trial continued and more information emerged. As news of the arrest spread through Port Charles, the community would be transformed by the shock of what had transpired. Gossip would dominate conversations at the hospital, at the Quartermain mansion, at the Corinthos penthouse, and everywhere else that people gathered. Alliances would be tested, relationships would be strained, and secrets that people had carefully kept hidden would be in danger of being exposed as the legal machinery began to move forward. Friends would be forced to choose sides, and family members would be torn between loyalty to their loved ones and their commitment to truth and justice. The social fabric of Port Charles would be disrupted, and the comfortable assumptions that people had made about the trustworthiness and integrity of Michael Corinthos and Tracy Quartermain would be shattered, at least temporarily, by the accusations and the evidence that had been presented against them. The question of why Michael would have been at the scene of Drew's shooting in the first place added another layer of complexity to the unfolding drama. Michael's connection to the incident was itself suspicious. How had he happened to be in the right place at the right time to witness the shooting? Was he there by accident, or had he been involved in some way? The investigation would undoubtedly delve into this question, and the answer could reveal motivations and connections that had previously remained hidden. Perhaps Michael had been there to meet someone or to handle some business matter and had stumbled upon the shooting entirely by chance. Or perhaps his presence there had been deliberate, arranged, orchestrated in some way that the investigation would need to uncover. The confession or revelation that Michael possessed knowledge of the shooter's identity would, if pursued by the authorities, eventually lead to the unmasking of whoever had actually pulled the trigger. The shooter had been protected by Michael's silence and Tracy's assistance, but now that the cover-up had been exposed, the next logical step would be to compel Michael to reveal who he had been protecting. Whether Michael would voluntarily provide this information or whether it would have to be extracted from him through the legal process remained to be seen. If Michael chose to remain silent and continued to refuse to reveal the shooter's identity even after being arrested and charged with perjury and conspiracy, then the authorities would face a challenging situation. They would need to pursue additional investigation to determine who the shooter was, or they could use the leverage of criminal charges to pressure Michael into cooperating. The broader implications of this scandal extended beyond the immediate legal consequences for Michael and Tracy. The scandal would raise questions about the integrity of the justice system in Port Charles, about whether justice could truly be served when people had such powerful motivations to cover things up, and about the extent to which family loyalty and personal relationships could drive people to compromise their principles and engage in serious criminal behavior. Michael Corinthos, in particular, had always been portrayed as someone with a strong sense of morality and justice, someone who believed in doing the right thing even when it was difficult. The revelation that he had chosen to obstruct justice and protect the identity of a shooter seemed to contradict this character foundation, which would make his actions all the more shocking and difficult for people to understand. Similarly, Tracy Quartermain had established herself as a shrewd and often ruthless businesswoman, but someone who ultimately believed in the rule of law and in proper procedures. The suggestion that she had willingly participated in a conspiracy to cover up the truth about Drew's shooting seemed out of character for her as well, or at least an extreme extension of her willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect her family and her interests. Her decision to help Michael conceal this information would suggest that she had very serious reasons for doing so. Perhaps the shooter was someone she cared deeply about, or perhaps Michael had leverage over her that compelled her cooperation. As the story continues to unfold and as the legal process moves forward, the viewers and followers of this shocking development in Port Charles would be left with countless questions and unanswered mysteries. What is the true identity of the shooter? What motivated Michael and Tracy to go to such extraordinary lengths to protect this person? Will Michael eventually reveal the shooter's identity, or will he maintain his silence despite the serious criminal charges he now faces? Will the evidence that Detective Chase presented hold up under scrutiny, or will it be challenged and potentially discredited as the defense teams prepare their responses? How will Willow's trial be affected by this dramatic turn of events? What will be the long-term impact on the families and relationships of those involved in this scandal? These questions and many others will drive the narrative forward as the story progresses. The dramatic arrest of Michael Corinthos and Tracy Quartermain in the courtroom represents a pivotal moment in this unfolding saga, a moment that will be remembered and discussed for years to come in the Port Charles community. The shock and disbelief that accompanied their removal from the courthouse will give way to careful legal maneuvering, strategic decisions, and revelations that will gradually piece together the puzzle of what really happened on the day that Drew was shot. The truth, as it always does, will eventually emerge, though the path to that truth will be complicated, painful, and fraught with unexpected twists and turns that will keep audiences engaged and on the edge of their seats as this compelling drama continues to develop. Next, we will dive deep into Gio's shattered identity, his broken violin, and why Sonny may hold the key to how this young man rebuilds his life in Port Charles. Gio has always been more than the kid with the violin. From the moment he first appeared in Port Charles, walking into scenes with that instrument case like it was an extra limb, viewers could tell music wasn't just a hobby or a plot gimmick. It was his language, his shield, and his compass. The way he held the bow, the intensity in his face when he played, and the silence that fell over a room whenever he performed all told the same story. Music was how Gio made sense of a world that never stopped shifting under his feet. That's precisely why the nurse's ball meltdown hit so hard. On the surface, it might have looked like a dramatic stunt, a young man learning a life-altering truth, then smashing his violin in front of the entire town. But for Gio, that wasn't theatrics. It was a raw, unfiltered reaction to his entire identity being rewritten in real time. The revelation about his true parentage didn't just shock him, it detonated the foundation of who he believed he was. The stage, the lights, the audience, they all disappeared in that moment. There was only the sound of his world cracking, and the violin became the physical object that took the blow. To understand why that single act carried so much weight, you have to go back to Camilla, the woman who raised him. She wasn't just the mother he knew. She was the architect of his sense of self. Every practice session, every gentle correction of his posture, every late-night reminder that discipline would carry him further than talent alone, those were the bricks she laid in the house of his identity. The violin was the last tangible thing connecting Joe to that life with Camilla. It held the echoes of his childhood lessons, the comfort of routine, and the pride of every performance he wanted her to see. It wasn't just wood, strings, and varnish. It was memory, obligation, and love all bound together. When Joe learned the truth about Brooklyn and Dante, that violin stopped being a safe object. Suddenly, the music he'd played his entire life felt like it had been scored over a lie. Every note he'd offered the world now seemed tainted by information that had been kept from him. The betrayal didn't just sit in his head, it seeped into his hands. Smashing the violin at the nurse's ball was his way of rejecting the version of himself that had been constructed without his informed consent. He wasn't turning his back on art. He was refusing to continue pretending that the old narrative of his life still fit. In that instant, Joe was not asking to be soothed, hugged, or talked out of his pain. He was fighting for air. His action was a form of survival, an instinctive attempt to create a break between before I knew and after I knew. The loss of the instrument became part of the necessary wreckage. Sometimes a character on General Hospital needs to burn down what no longer serves them before any kind of healing can begin. Gio's smashed violin was the match. This is why the idea of replacing the violin cannot be treated like a simple prop swap or a quick symbolic fix. A new instrument should not exist to erase the old one or to pretend the damage never happened. Instead, it represents an opportunity for Joe to reclaim agency. The crucial point is choice. He, and only he, gets to determine if music still belongs in his life, and if it does, what it will mean from this point on. The new violin isn't a substitute for the past. It's a blank page for a future he hasn't agreed to yet. Enter Sonny Corinthos, a man who has been orbiting this story long before anyone realized biology tied him to Joe. From the beginning, Sonny's support wasn't loud or performative. He didn't show up demanding gratitude or trying to mold Joe into some idealized version of a protege. Instead, he stood quietly in the background, underwriting lessons, encouraging practice, and making sure doors stayed open without ever pushing Joe through them. That restraint is what makes Sonny's role in this moment so compelling. On a show where power and money often come with strings attached, a violin purchased by Sonny could easily have been framed as a payout or an attempt to buy affection. But that's not how their history has been built. Sonny believed in Gio's music even when he had no idea they shared blood. His investment was emotional, not transactional. So if Sonny chooses to step in now and replace the violin, it carries a different meaning. It's not an apology stuffed into a velvet-lined case. It's a quiet acknowledgement. I see your pain. I respect that you're not okay. I'm not here to rush you past what happened. Sonny understands broken parent-child relationships at a level very few characters in Port Charles do. His entire life has been a study in the damage done by secrets, pressure, and misplaced expectations. He knows better than most that forcing reconciliation before someone is ready only deepens the fractures. When he looks at Joe, he doesn't just see a young musician, he sees a kid standing in the exact kind of emotional wreckage he spent decades trying to navigate himself. That makes his next move both deeply personal and narratively rich. If Sonny offers Joe a new violin with no strings attached, no demand for forgiveness, no lecture about family, no insistence on gratitude, it becomes one of those rare gestures on General Hospital that is purely about giving a character space. From a storytelling angle, this isn't a moment that closes a chapter. It opens several. Joe doesn't have to accept the gift. If he does accept it, he doesn't have to play it right away. The instrument can sit in a corner of his room, untouched, representing potential rather than pressure. That choice is everything. In soap storytelling, big emotional gestures often come with built-in expectations. I did this for you, so now you owe me emotional movement. Here, the power lies in the opposite. Sonny buying the violin isn't about fixing Joe, smoothing over conflict, or speeding past the fallout. It is, instead, a vote of confidence in Gio's capacity to navigate his own pain in his own time. Sonny is essentially saying, without words, I'm not going to script your recovery. I'm just going to make sure that when you're ready to write the next movement of your life, you have the tools to do it. For Joe, having that violin available, but not imposed on him, could reshape his journey. He might avoid it at first, staring at it like a reminder of everything he lost. Or he might pick it up in a moment of insomnia, when the need to translate his emotions into sound outweighs his anger. The first time he draws the bow across the strings again could be quietly monumental, not in front of an audience in formal wear, but alone in a dim room, where the only witness is himself. That is character growth that doesn't need a spotlight to matter. Meanwhile, the existence of that new instrument also reframes his relationships with Brooklyn and Dante. They cannot undo the hurt of the secrets they kept, and a violin from Sonny won't magically mend those bonds. But it creates narrative breathing room. Instead of everyone crowding Joe with apologies and explanations, the focus shifts to how he chooses to rebuild his inner life. Music becomes his decision again, not something tangled up in what they did or didn't tell him. Ultimately, this storyline is not about an object, but about autonomy. The original violin embodied Gio's past, his bond with Camilla, and the version of himself that grew in the shadow of partial truths. The smashed fragments on that nurse's ball stage symbolized a necessary death. The new violin, especially coming from Sonny, is not a resurrection of the old self, but an invitation to evolve. It says, you are allowed to be angry, you are allowed to be lost, and you are still allowed to create something beautiful from the pieces. For Sonny, the gesture may also be quietly redemptive. He cannot rewrite his own history with his children or erase the harm his choices have caused over the years. But in this one relationship, he has an opportunity to do something different, to offer support that doesn't manipulate, to give without demanding, to love without crowding. And for a character as complicated as Sonny, that kind of restrained, respectful act might be as transformative for him as the music will eventually be for Joe. In the end, the real question is not whether Joe will ever play again. It's whether he will be allowed to decide for himself what his life sounds like now. The broken violin marked the end of a story he didn't know he was trapped in. The new one, quietly placed within reach, represents the possibility that the next movement of his life, whatever tempo, whatever key, will finally be his to compose.